Well, welcome back again this week to another analysis behind the news. You, as I, probably saw a number of different newspapers over the last week saying that air war in Syria could last years in USA Today. Here's the Wall Street Journal, and the headline here says, U.S. promises long campaign in Syria. Even the Financial Times, it says, U.S. warns that airstrikes against ISIS herald start of sustained campaign. Now, isn't it interesting that we were talking about getting involved in all of this because of the beheadings in Iraq, and we're going to have to push ISIS out of Iraq, and then suddenly it segues into Syria. Well, I believe in the long run what's going to happen is that we're going to be involved in getting rid of Assad, and this is the back door toward doing that. But the other thing is that they're getting us involved in a prolonged war. How prolonged? The war on terrorism has lasted longer than a number of wars we've been involved in. World War I, World War II, the Civil War, etc. You put all those wars together, accumulatively, and they don't add up to the time we've been involved on the war on terror. And how's it going? Not well, I don't think, because terrorism is growing and growing. We see a new group, was every decade, now it's every couple of years, and then it was every year, now every month. We seem to have a new group that's growing up that's a danger to the United States. Now, there are purposes behind a prolonged war by those who wish to rule us. And first of all, it's used to change society. War is always a way of getting people to agree to things they would never agree to in the name of winning a war. New taxes, new regulations, the draft, all sorts of things. It downgrades our economy by spending money on crazy things, like sending $1 million missile to hit a truck, for instance. You would think that they would use it to hit something a little bit more valuable. But we see these photographs of them hitting Humvees and that sort of thing with very expensive munitions. And it's depleting those munitions. And some of these things, these smart bombs that we have, we're not going back into production, so it's depleting our military supply. They say we're not going to have boots on the ground. But ladies and gentlemen, you can't have a laser-guided bomb from an airplane. It has to be laser-guided from the ground. Somebody on the ground has to have the laser on the target in order for that bomb to hit it. So we already have boots on the ground, whether they say we do or we don't. Another thing that they're doing in the way of depleting the economy through the expense of war is at the same time, when you take other factors into consideration, you see them negotiating these treaties that will further deplete our economy. So-called free trade that's neither free nor trade. We've talked about that a lot. Another thing is that they're in the middle of negotiating a treaty that will decimate our service industry in the United States, allowing foreign companies to come in and perform the services that our bankers, our insurance companies, our realtors, that sort of thing do now. Now the siren song is it will open up markets overseas for our service companies to go over there and operate. Well, that's the same thing they told us about our industry, that we would be able to export our industry, in other words, the products, overseas. But what we did was exported the industry itself. So these are some of the things that are going on to deplete what's happening to our economy through war. Another thing is, too, that they're bringing in refugees. Oh, I know that Fox News, for instance, is talking about we've got to protect our borders so that terrorists won't come over and terrorize citizens in this country. But they ignore the fact that our own government is flying in refugees every day and putting them on the dole all over the country at your expense. We've done it with Hmong, we've done it with Somalis, we've done it there. In other words, now they're talking about the humanitarian thing to do is to bring in these refugees from Syria that look an awful lot like terrorists. And so there will be a certain number of them filtered into these people that they're bringing in. So all the way around, we're changing society. We're depleting our economy and everything else through prolonged wars. Another thing is that we're being programmed to fight not only terrorism, but now Russia as well. And what they're trying to do in all of this, particularly this new rise of militancy out of Russia, is to get involved in international government in order to perform these things. Here is an article, for instance, from The Independent, which is from the Great Britain. And on the cover it shows the head of NATO is retiring, and right next to it is the hammer and sickle flag out of Russia. And it's an article where the head of NATO is saying his biggest disappointment is that we have not been able to curtail Russia. And let me just read one of his statements, quoting him. NATO must work even closer with like-minded partners around the world to uphold the rules-based global order on which we built peace and prosperity. So in the name of fighting terrorism, in the name of probably curtailing Russia, they're talking about we've got to be involved more with NATO, and NATO has to be a global order organization. Some very dangerous things there, all in the name of conflict and war. Now, one of the things, too, that I've talked about before in relationship to terror is the fact that terror is used to react to people. And those beheadings that we have supposedly seen on television, we haven't actually seen the beheadings themselves, have reacted people to stand still for going in and ultimately having boots on the ground and that sort of thing in the name of ISIS. Now we have another group that's coming along too. Interestingly enough is this, that when they used to behead people in Algeria back in the 1950s, none of that ever got into the papers in the United States and reacted people into saving the Algerian people at that time from what they called militant Muslims. These militant Muslims were actually communists. Nothing's changed. And the communists went in and created this Muslim terrorist organization. And they would behead people and actually set the heads out on the roads so that people in the morning would come by these beheaded heads, and that would react them into being fearful of this organization, and so they didn't oppose the organization at the grassroots. Now, none of that got into the news in America. At the time, Algeria was a French state. It was actually part of France, considered part of France. They voted in French elections and everything else. And so here we had a militant Muslim organization out of Moscow doing these things, and nobody in the United States knew anything about it. They just felt that all this agitation that was going on in Algeria was for independence. And so many people supported Algerian independence in this country, not understanding what happened. And Ben Bella was a communist leader, got into the head of Algeria, turned it into a communist state. So that is the purpose of terrorism, is to react people. Now, if we didn't hear about that in those days, it was because they didn't want to react the people against the independence of a communist state. Terrorism is essentially, ladies and gentlemen, an American invention. I've said this before. John Brown was the first terrorist as we think of terrorism, and he was used to fundamentally split the country into two warring factions. It was only part of it, but a major part of it. And in the November bulletin of the John Birch Society, I'm going to get into that a little bit more to show you how it was manipulated. It'll only be a sketch. It will not be as extensive as it will be in my book next year. But one of the things that I do recommend is that you send for Exposing Terrorism, Inside the Terror Triangle I wrote a couple of years ago. Some of the details will have changed, but not the overall strategy. There's also a DVD for sale on terrorism, and I do recommend that you get this. You'll get a much better picture of what terrorism is all about with either the booklet or the DVD or both. Until next week, we'll see you then.